The hospital room was quiet in the way only expensive places could afford to be. Soft beige walls, filtered sunlight through tall windows, and the steady mechanical rhythm of machines keeping time with a fading life. Outside, California traffic hummed like nothing extraordinary was happening. Inside, everything felt heavy, suspended, as if the air itself was waiting for something to end. My husband lay in the bed, thinner than I had ever seen him, the sharp angles of his face softened by illness. For decades, he had been a giant in boardrooms, commanding, feared, respected. Men half his age trembled when he spoke. Now his breathing was shallow, his eyes drifting between sleep and memory. The empire he built, worth $92 million by conservative estimates, felt distant here, reduced to wires, paperwork, and whispered conversations in hallways. I sat beside him, my hands folded neatly in my lap, the way I had learned to sit through years of waiting for him to come home, waiting for him to notice me, waiting for him to choose family over work. Waiting became my quiet specialty. Our son stood near the window, scrolling on his phone, his reflection sharp against the glass. He looked just like his father had at that age, confident, polished, already convinced the world belonged to him. He barely glanced at the bed. When the doctor stepped out, the silence stretched. That was when my son finally turned toward me. His expression wasn't cruel, just practical, businesslike, the same look he used when closing deals. "Mom," he said softly, as if that made the words gentler, "we need to be clear about something." I looked up at him, expecting concern, maybe even reassurance. Instead, he lowered his voice and leaned closer. "Don't expect a dime from Dad's $92 million. The words landed quietly but carried the weight of a lifetime. I felt my chest tighten, but my face remained calm. Years of marriage had taught me how to absorb disappointment without flinching. He continued, as if explaining something obvious to a child. "Everything's already arranged. The companies, the properties, the accounts. Dad and I discussed it years ago. You'll be taken care of course, comfortably. But the money, the real assets, they're mine." I nodded slowly, not because I agreed, but because reacting would have given him satisfaction. Inside, memories stirred, moments I had buried for years. I remembered holding my husband's hand when he had nothing but ambition and debt. I remembered selling my jewelry to keep the business afloat during the early failures. I remembered raising our son alone while his father chased expansion deals across continents. Every sacrifice had been justified by the belief that we were building something together. Apparently, we weren't. "You understand, right?" my son added, checking his watch. "This is just how things are." I smiled faintly, the way one does when there's no point in arguing. He mistook my silence for acceptance. Later, as visiting hours ended, I sat alone with my husband. His eyes fluttered open briefly, unfocused but searching. For a moment, I thought he might say something, an apology, a confession, a final truth. Instead, he squeezed my fingers weakly and drifted back to sleep. I didn't cry. On the drive home, the city lights blurred past my windshield. I thought about the will reading scheduled in a few days, about lawyers and documents and sealed envelopes. I thought about how certain my son sounded, how secure he felt in his inheritance. What he didn't understand was that certainty is often the most dangerous thing of all. That night, sitting alone in the quiet house we had shared for 40 years, I made a decision. I would not beg, I would not argue, I would not warn him. I would simply listen. Because somewhere deep inside me, beneath the years of silence and sacrifice, a small, steady instinct whispered that my husband had never been a man who left things unfinished. And if there was one thing he respected more than ambition, it was control. The will reading would tell the truth, and whatever that truth was, I was ready to face it. The law firm overlooked downtown Los Angeles, its glass walls reflecting a city built on ambition and quiet cruelty. Everything about the place was designed to intimidate. Polished marble floors, abstract art that cost more than most. Homes, and a silence so controlled it felt rehearsed. This was where legacies were finalized, where lives were reduced to clauses and signatures. I arrived early, dressed simply in black. Not for mourning, there would be time for that later, but for clarity. I wanted nothing to distract from what was about to be decided. My son arrived minutes later, confident as ever, flanked by 2 attorneys who spoke to him in hushed, deferential tones. He didn't look at me. He didn't need to. In his mind, this meeting was a formality. The head attorney, a tall man with silver hair and a voice trained to command attention, called us into the conference room. A long table dominated the space, its surface flawless, reflecting every face like a quiet mirror of truth. Seats were taken, doors closed. The outside world disappeared. "We are here to read the last will and testament of Mr. Richard Hale," the attorney began. My son straightened slightly, folding his hands as though preparing to receive applause. The first clauses came quickly, efficiently. Corporate holdings transferred. Real estate portfolios listed in precise detail. Commercial towers, beachfront properties, warehouses in states I had never visited. Each one was assigned to my son. His jaw tightened in satisfaction, his earlier words echoing in my mind, "Don't expect a dime." I felt eyes on me, pity, curiosity, judgment, but I kept my gaze steady on the table. The wood grain ran in subtle patterns, calm and orderly. I focused on T, letting the words wash over me. Then the pace changed. "There exists," the attorney said carefully, "a separate set of instructions pertaining to Mrs. Hale." My son's pen paused mid-note. He looked up, annoyed more than concerned. These instructions were sealed under attorney-client privilege and were not disclosed to any party prior to this reading. The room shifted. Chairs creaked. My son leaned back slightly, arms crossed. "Probably personal effects," he said casually. "She always liked sentimental things." The attorney did not smile. "To Mrs. Hale," he continued. "Mr. Hale leaves full ownership and executive authority over Hale Meridian Holdings." The name struck the room like a low thunderclap. My son laughed once, sharply. "That company hasn't done anything in years. It's a shell. Dad parked assets there for tax reasons." "That is partially correct," the attorney replied evenly. "However, Hale Meridian Holdings retains controlling interest, directly or indirectly, in multiple subsidiaries previously believed to be independent." He slid a thick folder across the table, toward me. Inside were documents my son had never seen. Share structures, voting rights, quiet acquisitions that had taken place over decades, hidden behind layers of legal distance. Companies my son thought he owned outright were tethered, silently, to this so-called dormant entity. The color drained from his face. "This has to be a mistake," he said, leaning forward. "I've been running the empire for years. And you will continue to do so," the attorney said calmly, "subject to board oversight. The board, as defined here, answers to Mrs. Hale." The room was no longer silent. My son stood abruptly, anger flashing through his composure. "You're saying she controls everything?" "No," the attorney corrected. "We are saying she controls enough." I finally spoke, my voice steady despite the storm unfolding in front of me. "May I see the full scope of my responsibilities?" The attorney nodded, respectful now in a way he hadn't been before. "Your husband was very clear," he said. "He trusted your judgment." My son looked at me then, really looked at me, for the first time in years, confusion, fear, disbelief. He had spent his life assuming power was inherited by birthright. He had never imagined it could be given elsewhere. The meeting ended in fragments, legal questions, deferred explanations, promises of follow-up sessions. But the truth was already sealed. As I walked out of the building, the city looked different, not kinder, not softer, just clearer. My son followed a few steps behind, silent now, his certainty shattered. The will reading had not crowned a king. It had revealed a balance. And for the first time I understood that my husband's final lesson was not about money at all. It was about trust, patience, and the quiet strength of those who wait. Episode 3 would bring the reckoning. The weeks following the will reading unfolded like a slow, burning storm, one that gathered strength in silence before breaking with devastating clarity. Los Angeles moved on as it always did. Traffic choking the freeways, deals closing over quiet lunches, fortunes rising and falling without sentiment. But inside the Hale empire, the air had changed. What had once been a kingdom ruled by assumption was now a chessboard, and every piece had begun to move. I did not rush into my new role. Power, when revealed too quickly, invites resistance. Instead, I observed. I read. I listened. Every morning I sat at the long dining table in the house I had once felt invisible in, poring over documents that told a truer story than any conversation ever had. Balance sheets revealed patterns, board minutes hinted at unease. Emails, forwarded carefully by the legal team, exposed loyalties that had never been as solid as my son believed. Richard had planned this meticulously. Long before illness hollowed his body, he had hollowed the certainty of succession. Hale Meridian Holdings, dismissed as dormant, was in fact the keystone of everything. Through it, voting rights flowed. Through it, final approvals passed. And now through it, every major decision required my consent. My son reacted as expected. At first, he denied it. He flooded the attorneys with questions, demanded reinterpretations, accused everyone briefly, quietly, of manipulation. When that failed, he grew angry. Meetings were canceled. Emails went unanswered. He tried to rally executives to his side, reminding them of promotions given, favors granted, careers shaped under his leadership. But loyalty built on convenience is fragile. The first board meeting under the new structure was held in a private conference room overlooking the Pacific. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed an ocean calm enough to feel ironic. My son arrived late, his expression tight, jaw clenched with the effort of restraint. He took his seat without greeting me. The chairman cleared his throat. Formalities were observed, reports delivered. And then, inevitably, the conversation turned. "There are concerns," my son said, breaking the measured tone of the room, "about delays, about decision bottlenecks." He did not look at me when he spoke, but everyone else did. "I'm sure there are," I replied evenly. Change tends to expose inefficiencies that were previously ignored. A few executives exchanged glances. One nodded, almost imperceptibly. "What exactly is your vision here?" my son asked, finally turning toward me. "Because from where I sit, this structure is redundant." I folded my hands, feeling no rush. "From where you sit," I said, "it probably feels like interruption. From where I sit, it feels like accountability." The room held its breath. I did not raise my voice. I did not accuse. I simply began to speak about subsidiaries quietly underperforming while reporting artificial growth, about risk exposure hidden behind aggressive leverage, about partnerships formed more for optics than stability. Every point was precise, every figure documented, every concern grounded in data. My son stared at me, stunned. These were issues he had either dismissed or never noticed. Not because he was incompetent, but because he had never believed he needed to look too closely. Success had always arrived regardless. By the end of the meeting, the board voted, unanimously, to proceed under my proposed oversight framework. The illusion shattered that day. In the weeks that followed, my son's world shrank. Invitations grew formal, conversations shortened. Where once his presence commanded immediate agreement, it now invited scrutiny. He was still powerful, still wealthy, still respected, but no longer unquestioned. One evening he came to the house unannounced. I was in the study, the same room where Richard had spent countless nights writing in journals. No one was meant to read until the end. My son stood in the doorway, hesitant in a way I had never seen. "You planned this," he said quietly. "No," I replied. "Your father did." He stepped inside, hands in his pockets. "You knew he was doing this." "I suspected," I admitted, "but I didn't know how far he'd go." Silence stretched between us, heavy. Why? The years of unspoken resentment. "He trusted you more than me," my son said. Not angrily now, but wounded. I looked at him then, really looked at the boy I had raised, the man he had become. "He trusted you with action," I said softly. "He trusted me with restraint. Those are not the same thing." He swallowed hard. "I told you not to expect anything," he said, almost to himself. "I know," I replied, "and I believed you." That seemed to hurt him more than any accusation. The final reckoning came months later, when an international acquisition, one my son had championed, fell apart under closer examination. Regulatory risks, inflated projections, a deal designed to look impressive rather than endure. The board rejected it, citing my recommendation. The press framed it as caution, analysts called it wisdom, investors stabilized. My son resigned 2 weeks later, not forced, not publicly humiliated, just finished. On his last day, he left his office without ceremony. No speeches, no farewell emails. The empire he believed was his birthright continued without pause, and me, I did not take his place. I appointed a seasoned executive, someone patient and unglamorous, someone who understood systems rather than spotlight. I remained where Richard had intended me to be, quietly at the center, ensuring balance, protecting the structure from ego and haste. Years later, people would ask how a widow, dismissed for decades, had come to hold such influence. They would say it was luck. They would say it was manipulation. They would say Richard had been cruel. But the truth was simpler. Power does not always announce itself. Sometimes it waits. Sometimes it listens. Sometimes it smiles while others assume it has nothing to offer. And when the moment arrives, it does not shout. It endures. If this story moved you, if it made you reflect on legacy, power, and the unseen forces that shape history, thank you for staying with us until the end. This story was brought to you by Legend Arshman, where untold stories find their voice. If you enjoyed this video, please take a moment to like it, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who appreciates deep, meaningful storytelling. Leave a comment below. We'd love to hear your thoughts and what this story meant to you. Stay connected with Legend Arshman for more untold stories, hidden truths, and powerful histories waiting to be uncovered. And if you have a story you believe deserves to be told, reach out to us. Some stories don't fade with time. They wait for the right moment to be heard.